Today on The Sales Life, I've got a great guest lined up for you. But before I do, I just want to thank you for choosing to listen to The Sales Life. If this is your first time here, I'd like for you to stick around by subscribing and making The Sales Life a permanent part of your week. If you're into podcasts or you're only into video, I got you covered either way. You can find The Sales Life on your favorite podcast app or search for The Sales Life on YouTube or subscribe to them both. Shout out to this week's listener, Eric in New York, who texted me a beautiful picture of the leaves turning while taking a walk and listening to The Sales Life. And where are you listening? Send me a text or picture, maybe even a beautiful landmark where you're enjoying your day and listening to The Sales Life. You can text me at 337-565-0906. And it's great people like you that have made the Sales Life podcast one of the top 5% podcasts in the world. So thank you. If you would help support and show your love for the show, would you consider taking a second to rate the show or a few minutes to leave a review? This is the best form of advertising that I cannot buy. Your words, their eyes could change everything for that listener. And it was because you initiated the change. If you hang out on Facebook, The Sales Life has their own Facebook page. Subscribe to it. That way, as new episodes are released, we got accepted, and Facebook will automatically post the new podcast as it rolls out. My friend Joe Ferraro, who is one of the best podcasters in the world, he hosts the 1% Better podcast. I urge you to check it out. He hates the phrase "without further ado," so I'll just skip those words. Today on the show, David Perry, author of Game of Sales. And David worked at Google, IBM, Amazon, and he's still in the game at Adobe. These are behemoth companies, and he's a top sales person there. In this episode, you'll learn why sales is a marketable and portable skill that you can take into any area of your life, the benefits of sales. It's one of the few professions where you don't have to trade time for money, but there's some tough times too. And David will show you how to prepare for the dark side of sales and also power through when you find yourself in one of those situations. I also ask him why salespeople quit. He's got an interesting answer and also a powerful solution on how to become automatically persistent. We can all use that. So if you're thinking about getting into sales, or you're in a funk in sales, or you could just use some of the skills to apply to your everyday life to have more, do more, be more, then say no more. Enjoy today's episode. Stick around to the end. That way you can learn how to connect to me more. My guest today is David Perry, author of Game of Sales, Lessons Learned While Working at Adobe, Amazon, Google, and IBM. David, welcome to The Sales Life.
Thanks, Marsh. Great to be here.
Glad that we can finally connect. So, David, you get an MBA from Cornell University, just a clear path. You become an analyst and a programmer, and yet you leave to become a salesperson. When I think of sales, many times people get into the sales industry as a last resort, yet you made it a first choice. So when you elected to take the leap and get into sales, what did your family say?
My family was incredibly supportive because the jump into sales and business development involved, at IBM, for example, they have something called levels, right? So it was a 2-level jump, promotion into a business development and sales role. So they were very supportive. And there's a lot of strategy and work with senior executives and so forth involved in that initial move.
Once you made the jump, was there a time that you kind of looked back and was like, I don't know if I made the right decision or not?
For sure. There's certainly been, many points where I've questioned my direction. And what I always come back to, though, is that I just try to recenter myself on why is it that I'm doing what I'm doing. And once I focus more on the why, it always helps bring me back and make me realize like how grateful I am for the fact that I am focused on sales and that it is really the optimal path for me. And I think probably for many different people. And I also believe that just about anybody can be good at sales and that there's a certain like tool set that you can learn. And there are things you can do to get you past those trying times, for example.
You know, when I think of elite salespeople like yourself that have worked on some of the top companies in the world, when you think of high-level salespeople, they are, when you see them, really, they jam up your social media feed with the flashy cars and the expensive watches and the big houses and the me. Yet when I look at David Perry, you're more like the quiet storm. What's the thinking behind that?
Oh, yeah. Well, the thinking behind that is that those other folks are making money from their online presence, right? They're making money from being showy, and they're trying to attract people to themselves in that way. Like, this is not my livelihood, right? My livelihood is, I'm a practicing salesperson, right? I'm working with clients, and that's my livelihood. So I think that's really the difference. And so what I really set out to do is, as a salesperson and a leader, I want to help people grow. I want to help people mature in their career paths and have a little bit of a straighter line than I did, maybe not as many ups and downs. And so I think that's really the difference. And if you ever see me, online showing off a Ferrari, something terrible must have happened to me.
Somebody, it's Photoshop, right?
Right.
What's interesting to me, David, is you're still in the game. There are a lot of people who write books that are let me tell you how I did it. Yet you're one of those guys that, let me tell you how I'm doing it. Just amazing.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Sales it's a culmination of experiences. So what skills did you take from your time of being an analyst and a programmer that ended up becoming a superpower, I guess more so as a leverage when you got into the sales aspect of it?
There's a whole host of skills that I gathered before I feel like I really went into sales, let's say, full time. It was the analytical skills is immensely valuable. I also went to business school about, oh my God, it was like 17, 18 years ago. Graduated, I'd say 16 years ago.
Doesn't seem that long ago, does it?
It doesn't. But so it was really after business school. So I had a career and a set of education and even some strategy consulting experience before I went into sales full time. And all of those things have been immensely helpful over time, particularly the analytical skill set, being able to deconstruct deals or, let's say, complex pricing methodologies, but also being able to understand financial impact, build business cases. All of those things are things that I learned before coming into sales. And also the notion of being able to ramp up very, very quickly on an industry and a company as a result of my strategy consulting experience. So all of that has been immensely helpful. And I have the skill set now to be able to, so if I'm working on a new company, I can ramp up on that company really quickly with a combination of, let's say, strategy consulting skills.
What a powerful set of skills. So from a weighted standpoint, what percentage of that was learned in college versus on the job, on the fly kind of training?
Yeah, so I would say that, so in college, I really didn't learn anything to that standpoint. So college, so I went to a liberal arts school. It's called Colgate University. It's a small liberal arts college in upstate New York. And so I studied economics and political science there. So there was nothing, I don't know if I really picked up a lot of those skills there. It was more so when I went to business school at Cornell, where I started getting much deeper into the business aspects of sales and picked up some of those skills I thought that really helped me today.
Was that something that you deliberately did, leaving Colgate and going to Cornell, or was it something that you were kind of in between and then just decided, well, let me go this direction, or was that just this is what I'm doing?
It was not at all a direct line. So I graduated from college. I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I had a couple jobs in technology, went to business school, but what I really learned was that I wanted to be client facing. I wanted to impact the strategy of companies, and I wanted to be a driver of change rather than a recipient of change. And for that reason, I went to business school with that and mindset and went into strategy consulting. And then when I was in strategy consulting, I realized I enjoyed delivering the projects, but I really loved putting the pitches together and pitching clients and winning business. And whereas my peers were like really not into that. So that was like a big indicator for me that I should go into sales. And then also at the time, and I think that this role still exists, but there was something called the client executive. This is, going back 15 years ago. It might be called the same thing today at IBM. And these were folks that I know like they were making a ton of money maybe by today's standards, they were making like $2-3 million. And they were managing really complex relationships. And I consider them master commanders of their career and relation of IBM and also of the client. And they were always able to generate value for all parties. And so I was like, that's what I want to do. And that's what motivated me to go into the sales profession.
Mm-hmm. You have the privilege of being able to work with so many different age groups and so many diverse cultures, being at these companies that you've worked for. And David, every generation, sometimes, man, I feel like we're like that Geico commercial or Progressive, I forget which one it is, where you become your parents. And I think parents are always saying kids today, and then they're banging that mantra, and the kids today aren't the same that they once did. But what is the red thread that runs through younger salespeople that you see and that you develop today that has become more of an asset prior to generations?
Well, of course, there's a difference between the way that different generations approach the profession, but there's also I think there are things that haven't changed. And when you hear Jeff Bezos talk about Amazon, for example, he built his business around. I know there are a few things that are not going to change. I know consumers they're never going to want to pay more for products. They're never going to want to wait longer for products. So in other words, they want cheaper, faster, better. So that's what he built his business on. And I think it's the same thing in sales. So the people that excel, they all have the same qualities. They're all persistent and assertive. They know what they want to get and they're willing to keep on trying. They have a high degree of awareness and emotional intelligence about how they're conducting themselves and how they're getting things done. And then the final thing is they're committed to learning and growing. And those traits I just mentioned, regardless of how old or young or whatever, if the individual doesn't have those traits, I think it's going to be really difficult for them to be successful in sales, but probably a lot of different careers.
Yeah, you kick off the book stating that a lot of people would look at your bio and look at what you're doing now and who you're working for, David, and say, well, he's just a natural at this. Yet you crack the book from the start saying that you're nothing special other than just a couple of things that you were committed to. What are a few of those things that got you to where you are today?
I agree with that. And so that assertion that I think anybody can do it or be successful in sales, that comes from my experience of coming into the field as let's say, a relative newbie, whereas others might have had 10, 15 years experience on me. And also just getting to know so many different people over the course of my career with just like radically different personalities and approaches and skill sets that they're bringing to the table, and each of them finding a way to be successful. So that's how I came to that conclusion.
Well, the book is Game of Sales, and I have some thoughts on the word game, but would love to hear your thoughts as to why you chose the word game in the book title.
So I thought a whole bunch of different titles, like Enterprise Sales Secrets and all these other things. And it's funny because some of those books actually came out around the same time as mine. But I settled on Game of Sales because I wanted it to be more of a fun and or at least an engaging read. And I've read a lot of business books in my day. I don't know, 50, 100, maybe more. And the ones that I like the best are the ones that are just real and practical and are not too academic. So I just wanted to make a clear statement. That's not what this is. This is based on practical experience. And I didn't want to also put it out there that this is some type of scholarly exercise where I was holed up with a white coat and did research across thousands of sales professionals. I mean, there are books out there like that in sales, and they're great too, but that's not what this is.
No, it's not. And like I alluded to at the beginning, you have just such a unique vantage point that you're still in the game, which is what I love. David, one could rip the first chapter out of the book and just make it a recruiting tool to get others into the sales profession, because a lot of people think that sales is risky. You actually say it's not risky at all because sales is portable and it's marketable. So what did you mean by that?
Yeah. It really, that again grew out of my experience when I was in technology, and my job was completely the opposite of what you just described. It was totally unmarketable, totally unscalable, not portable. So I could go and say, here's what I'm doing in this role. And the next person would be like, I have no idea what you just said. And it's so specialized and so esoteric, and everything is proprietary. Barely anything is transferable. Whereas if you say you're in sales, everybody understands that. Yeah, maybe you're selling this or you're selling that. To some extent, it's transferable. So what I mean by that is that someone in my role, like I've seen people in my role go to the number of companies that they're able to go to is astronomical, hundreds of different companies. And so I don't see that as risky. What I see as risky is if you get incredibly specialized and you're so specialized that you find yourself in a hole that you can't get out of. And sales is totally opposite. So if you prove yourself at Adobe or Google or Amazon or a startup, you're going to be able to go out there in the market and get work for any company you want, and maybe even go into a tangential role in sales if you want. Maybe you're done with sales. You know what? I want to be a sales trainer, or maybe I want to go into a sales engineering role or consulting role, or I want to go more into business development, or maybe even corporate development if you're working on really large deals. So there's a whole host of other things at tangents that you can go into as well.
Absolutely. One thing I tell salespeople all the time is, this may not be your end all profession, and sales may not be, but what's beautiful about sales is you can take this into any area of your life, into any other profession that you want to go to, and just leverage it. I run into people all the time that just didn't make it in sales, but they can still use those skills and apply those to where they are today. Have you had similar situations like that?
Oh, for sure. That happens on a regular basis, where the skill set that I've developed helps me in my everyday life. But I did want to mention something when you said about the first chapter of the book being a recruiting tool for people to go into enterprise sales. It's funny because I guess it does kind of read that way, but the real intent there is to just reconnect sellers with the why of why are they doing it. And if they can reconnect with that and say, okay, let's say I'm in enterprise sales or technology sales or what have you. If I really think about what is it that I'm doing, I get to work with a varied set of incredible companies, either work for them or with them as meeting top business leaders. I'm traveling and going to cool places and events, constantly learning because technology is always changing. And I have those other attributes that you mentioned, like that I'm building a skill set. It's portable. It's something that I can do over the long term, and I can consistently grow. And so I think all those things are really exciting. And it was important, I think, to start off the journey of the book in that way, to just reconnect people with the why. And if someone's in a dark place, then reconnecting with the why they're doing it is going to help them not only to rekindle their interest in sales, but also to hopefully motivate them to go through the rest of the book and be like, okay, this is something I really want to commit myself to. So it was the first chapters tend to be helpful, but also kind of a hook for the rest of the book.
Dude, I like slammed the book down when I first read that. I'm like, yes, like it is, and you said it all in one paragraph, like something that I didn't put it as succinctly as you did, but it's just something, man, that you can take anywhere and everywhere that you want to go. Now, as much as I would love to say that sales is all rainbows, unicorns, and blow pops, there's a dark side of it also, which was my favorite chapter, because I think many times, David, that we give salespeople or prospective salespeople, we give them wings, but we don't give them roots. Meaning that a key ingredient, as you write, is having that unshakable resilience in sales. And I think many times that even though the sales profession is so lucrative and you're not trading time for money, and it really just pays out massive dividends, I think many times that we don't give salespeople the roots, or prospective salespeople, or the ones that are in the business now, we don't give them the roots to be able to, weather the storms. They're not prepared to handle them, like chip shortages and economic crashes and weather-related situations and tragedies. So speaking of the dark side of sales and preparing them for the dark side of sales, what should prospective people that are interested in getting in sales, what should they expect? And then if they're in sales and they're in a funk, how can they push through the dark side?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as I thought about the process and the different components of the book, there are 12 chapters, but each one is an individual, let's say, it's both a problem that needs to be solved by the individual, but it's also an ideal. And so the dark side of sales chapter is what I wanted to do for the reader. And again, whether they realize it or not, I'm basically easing their pain of like being in the sales profession by helping them to set realistic expectations for what they're going to face as they go through their career. And I mentioned a whole host of things. And the funny thing is, I didn't mention any of the things that you were talking about. I obviously was not able to predict a pandemic. I didn't predict that, but I was like, whatever it's going to be, there's going to be change, there's going to be tough times. And I gave, let's say, 8 or 10 examples that you're sure to face that are difficult in your sales career. And by changing those expectations and just making sure that people are aware those things are coming when they happen, it dramatically softens the blow, right? This way, it's not this unexpected thing. They're like, okay, I'm ready for it. Massive, massive difference, huge value in that chapter. Again, whether they realize it or not. So someone that hasn't been through it, they're not going to be like, oh, I read that in Game of Sales and now I'm better off. They're not going to know that, but they're going to be better off, and that's great. So that's my intention there. But the other point is around the dark side of sales. What is it? Like, what makes it the dark side of sales? Like, some people think, oh, well, it's about like people being underhanded or people lying or whatever. Like, no, that's not at all what I'm talking about. What the dark side of sales is, it's all within yourself. It's your reaction to uncertainty or a difficult situation that is inappropriate. So you're inappropriately reacting or inappropriately engaged with a difficult situation, and it might force you to spin and spin and spin downwards into a dark place and you're resting in a place of like fear and anxiety and feeling like you're helpless when you're not necessarily those things. And so I give the people the tools to get out of that, to stop spinning and get out of it. And so that's what to me the dark side of sales is. It's that inappropriate reaction to uncertainty, to these changes. And because I'm in it, I can see when people are falling into that negative cycle. Even the best people, it happens to me. It happens to, like, I don't care I know all the top salespeople at Adobe, all the guys, like, and girls, like, even they have moments where they're kind of falling into that cycle, but they snap out of it quickly. It might even be a momentary thing. Whereas I see others that end up, let's say, not being successful or leaving the company or what have you, they're like living there. And so I'm really trying to make sure that I provide people tools to get out of that.
Yeah, it really speaks to letting people know that you're not alone. And I think many times sales it's kind of like wrestling, not WWE wrestling, but the regular high school wrestling, where it's just you and the other opponent or other person on the mat. And sometimes, I mean, there's nowhere you can hide, and it's a solo sport at times, even though it's a collective effort. Many times, man, you feel like you're the only one. So even David, if they're not in sales and are getting into sales, at least they can use your book as a reference guide to go back to and say, okay, now I kind of know because you can sit there and preach it all day long, preparing them. Hey, but yeah, okay. And they don't actually get it, but at least they have now a point of reference using your book that they can now relate to once they go through it and then continue on in it as well. So why do salespeople quit?
Yeah, there's so many reasons, but I think it really comes down to two. And I think the first reason is they're not aligned with their direct manager. And then the second reason is they don't believe that the expectations that are placed upon them are achievable. So that's it. Those are the two reasons. And sometimes they can happen together. And so what I mean is, like, you could have the best, working for the best company or the best manager in the world. They give you, let's say, a certain territory, or they give you something to sell, and it's just simply not sellable, or maybe the number is too large. You know, maybe you're selling $1 million deals, and each of those deals takes a year, and you got 3 customers, they give you a $10 million number, right? That's a bit of a hyperbole, but not very inspiring to be able to, if you're in that situation. And so that's a big reason why people leave. And granted, that perception may or may not be real. It may be totally achievable, but if the salesperson doesn't think that they can be successful, then they'll leave. And as I mentioned, the manager. And so what happens is, on occasion, for whatever reason, a sales manager and a seller just might not be aligned, and that goes to that's to my point of that there are so many different ways to be successful, and maybe for whatever reason that they're just not seeing eye to eye, and that could be another reason.
Yeah. So how does a salesperson develop some of their confidence? So they get into the business, not quite sure. It's a rejection-based business. You're going to fail more than you succeed, but that's the only way that you succeed. So what are some methods that salespeople could use to increase their confidence while getting rejected all at the same time?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I'm just I don't even notice it. And if I'm, like, quote unquote rejected, or if I fail, I try to learn from, if I feel like I failed, I try to learn from that. But the rejection thing, it's just, I don't know, it doesn't phase me at all. And as a matter of fact, I started recording my attempts, and I was shocked by how many times I was actually like not getting responses. I just assumed I get responses every time. That's how I feel. I feel like if I need to get a hold of somebody, I'm getting a hold of that person. But I was like, actually, no, I don't. Like, there's a lot of misses in there. But I think the way to do that and the way to build your confidence in that regard is by systematizing your approach. You can create a spreadsheet or whatever tool you might want to use, and simply put down, like, make a list of the folks or the companies that you're trying to work with. Have you reached the decision maker? Yes or no? Last action, next action. And you just cycle through that. There's no hemming and hawing. There's no emotion. You just go through it. And you're able to completely eliminate any of that, like, doubt and fear or distraction around who you're going to go to next. And I think the people that aren't successful, they don't have that structure. And this is one of, let's say, 50 things you need to do to be successful in enterprise sales, for example. But if you don't have this one, like, layer or a structure in your approach, you're not going to be successful.
Are you referencing to automatic persistence?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So let's unroll that, man. Great segue. Unroll the automatic persistence. I love this.
This chapter, and I actually recommend that folks read, like, anytime you're going into a new job or new territory, read the book. I think it's a great primer, but this chapter in particular is really important. And so it's chapter 4, and it's called Automatic Pipeline. It's really about, like, how are you able to approach a new role or new territory and set yourself up for success. And there are really 4 things that you can do. And you have to do all these 4 things. And if you don't, your odds of being successful are going to be much. But if you do them, like, you're going to be, I think, ahead of your peers. And so the first thing to do is to analyze your territory. And that sounds really stupidly simple. And people might be rolling their eyes, but I wonder how many people are actually doing that. And so what I mean by that is setting aside a day or 2 or 3 where you're literally doing nothing but analyzing your territory. I'm talking, if you have 50, 100, 200, 300 accounts that you're going after, you list out those accounts, you try to pick different data points, like whatever is important to you and your ability to succeed. Maybe it's location, maybe it's a budget size in a certain area. And so you understand those 2 or 3 top things of what makes them a good candidate, but then also 2 or 3 things of why they cannot buy. Maybe it's a highly regulated industry and they simply can't buy for a regulatory reason. And imagine you're wasting a week or a month going after those companies, and then you discover that, right? You need to know all that stuff up front. So you're focusing on only the cream of the crop of the companies that are going to yield results, and you're not going down a bunch of blind alleyways. So imagine 2 people, one person that spent 2-3 days up front analyzing, understanding exactly, knowing which are the top 10, 20 companies they need to go after, versus someone else who's just guessing. If you play that tape 100 times, the person that spends the time upfront analyzing is going to be so much better off. And almost, again, I'd say 99 times 100 is going to beat the other individual. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the pipeline. So I call it the pipeline activator, right? It's like that spreadsheet where you have the list of companies, the name of the individual, decision maker, yes or no, last action, next action. It just sounds so simple, but again, it's incredibly powerful because it removes all the hemming and hawing, and it gives you the confidence that you're focused in the right way. And so I've moved my pipeline forward numerous times in an hour in a single day across, let's say, 20 different opportunities by using that methodology. And then the other 2 pieces, I call it the opportunity basket, which means what size opportunity are you going after? Are you going after all home runs? Are you going after all singles and doubles, or what's your mix? And so my assertion is that keep it 50-50. Get some low-hanging fruit, home runs, go after both. And it really depends. Like maybe you should be going after all home runs, or maybe you should be going after all singles and doubles. You'll get a feel for it, but start off with that basket in mind and adjust over time. And if you do that, the benefit of doing that is once you get a single or double in, by the time you go at that home run, you know how the process at your company works. You know what the paper is. And similarly, if you're talking about home runs, getting the singles and doubles is a lot easier because you're able to form this talk strategically across business issues, and then these little ticky-tack deals become much more matter of fact, and you're able to get them, push them through a lot faster because you're used to dealing with more senior executives, and again focusing on more strategic topics. So there's mutually reinforcing benefit in that framework. And then the final thing.
Let me double click on that real quick if I could before you go to that. So what I found that was interesting was that you said new salespeople, they focus on transactional deals, and when you should actually flip the model and go transformational. So speaking of the singles and doubles, my thought is how do you go big if you've never gone big before?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. And I think what it comes down to is really the final chapter in the book, which is having a mental model of, so in order to go big, in order to move past the singles and doubles, I would argue that any salesperson that closes, well, not any, but most, right? Every once in a while, there's somebody who's kind of lucks into something. They happen to have the perfect client, the perfect time, and they're just taking an order. And that definitely happens, but probably not that much. Any salesperson that's doing a complex multi-solution, whatever that deal size is that they're closing, I can guarantee you that they could close something maybe even 10 times larger. They have the capability to do it, or that's kind of how they're thinking.
Is it a mental mind? Is it a cap they put
absolutely
mentally?
Yeah, it's a mental model, and the mental model is this. So you need to look at your company, what can it deliver, and then at the most transformational level. So if your company is working with another company, what is the craziest most ridiculous deal that you could possibly imagine? And other people in the company would say you're crazy for even thinking that that's possible, right? That is your starting point. And so that's where you have some idea of how that might work, how that would be implemented, who you need to talk to at your company and their company, and maybe you need to bring in a consulting partner or whatever it is. You can understand what that thing is. And then beneath that might be the biggest deal at your company, or maybe the biggest deal in the product set. So that's, I call that above the line for the strategic deals. And anything below that is more the transactional deals, where it's well within the grooves of the current operating model or go-to-market of your company. So I think having that understanding that there is no box, there is no container for what you're doing, that will help you to think more strategically. At the same time, I have to caution folks that that's risky too, right? Because if all you're doing is focused on those crazy big deals, they might not materialize, or it might take a lot longer than you think. That's why you need the mix of the singles and doubles.
I'm 3 miles away from the Gulf of Mexico. And there's a lot of guys, man, that they go offshore and they go fishing for mako sharks. Yet I have a suspicion that if David Perry was going fishing, he'd be fishing for jaws and not the mako shark. So, okay. So why don't you bring us home with the, cause I want to finish this point of the automatic persistence. So we have the pipeline activator, we have the opportunity basket. So what's number 3 and 4?
Yeah. And we also talked about analyzing the territory, right? Or territory prioritization. And so the 4th point is just understanding the commercial model. And so what I mean by that is I assume that there's a contract available, right? If you're joining a company, that there's some deal that's been closed, unless you're at a very, very early stage startup. But regardless, you need to go find that contract, the most complex one, the largest value one, go through it in detail, make sure you understand it inside and out. All the sales terms, the length of time, the quantity, what the heck is really being sold, what is the customer signing up, for here. And if you don't do that, then you're going to make a lot of mistakes in your negotiation process, or even the way you're positioning the deal. What if you don't really know that, most of our deals are 3-year deals, or most of our deals are, we really want to go for one. Something like that is like so fundamental. And I believe it or not, I've seen mistakes like that being made, like really fundamental mistakes without an understanding of what the terms and conditions are of the agreement, and even like what the hangups of the customers might be with respect to that particular commercial model and pricing model. So the beautiful thing is, once you see that contract, you can visualize, okay, that's all it is. It's a little signature on the dotted line, and here are the terms. And so it just makes it much easier to drive towards that, if you know what that thing really is.
And this is where your superpower of becoming an analyst really come into play for you as well. You speak that your career has had some unhighlights as well. So it's not the traditional sales book where I knocked it out of the park every single time. And you're candid about listing those things.
Yeah.
So you've lost deals in the moment. It's gone horribly wrong. You were blindsided. You weren't expecting some things. And then you've lost deals at the end of it also. And for me, David, when I lose a deal, it's because the customer didn't like the interest rate, because I work in the car business and they didn't buy a warranty. But when you lose a deal, man, it's millions of dollars, a lot of members on a team, years of devotion. Man, how do you recover from that?
Yeah, it's really rough when you lose a deal like that. And so fortunately, there haven't been very many along the lines of what you're describing. And the reason is that I think I take great pains to make sure that I'm kicking the tires along the way, to use an automotive analogy. And by doing that, make sure that the resources of the team are focused in the right way. So I try to pull out if I don't think there's an opportunity there, probably maybe even sooner than I should sometimes. So that's how I mitigate against that. But if I do fail, if I do lose the deal, I just take a hard look at it. What did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? And I try to be way more critical of myself than anyone else would be. And so that's been a consistent theme. And so that's really helped me grow. But at the same time, it's like the further along I get into my career, I realize I'm just making more and more mistakes, or I see that there are more and more mistakes, or more things that I could have done differently. So it's both a blessing and a curse, I guess, to have that perspective, because you're constantly making trade-offs between, I could have done this, this, and this, but I need to allocate that time in a different way to a different deal, and that's kind of like the art and the science, I think, of what we do.
Yeah. David, I think when people read your book, even if they're not in the sales profession, I think they can still capitalize on a lot of what you've poured your heart into. Who is the book not for?
The book is not for somebody in sales that thinks they know it all, right? Or they think they have nothing to learn. It's definitely not for that person, but I'd say it's just about for anybody else. And I wrote it specifically for somebody, let's say 25, 26, just got into tech sales and trying to figure out how do they go from making, let's say, 100, 150 to making very consistently 300K. That is who the book is for. And I think the other thing that's important to mention is that I don't know if there's anything that's like, I think there's some things in here that are maybe a little bit counterintuitive, but it's not something that, like, let's say if someone's been in enterprise sales for 20 years, they're not going to read this and be like, oh my God, I'm so surprised. Oh, I didn't know that, or I didn't know this. But I do think it will help to clarify their thinking, or at least they'll feel like it's autobiographical, meaning like, yep, this is it. This is true. This book will help people understand and determine if they're going to like a career in technology sales. So if you read this book and you're like, that's great, I want to do it, go for it. If you read this book and you're like, oh, that's not for me, do not go into sales. That's what I suggest.
My guest today is David Perry, author of Game of Sales, Lessons Learned While Working at Adobe, Amazon, Google, and IBM. David, where can people learn more about you? Get the book, of course, and I'll let you have the final words. You take us home.
Yeah, thanks so much, Marsh. So you can learn more about me on LinkedIn. If you look up David Perry, Adobe, or Google, I'm assuming you'll find me pretty easily. Or you can go to Amazon and look up Game of Sales, and you'll find the book there. So yes, Marsh, it was a wonderful conversation, and I think I want to leave the reader with just one thing. So if you do read the book, my hope is that you take at least one thing and then apply it to your job in sales, like that day or that week, and hopefully that thing you'll see that and start to be able to apply some others as you go. So that's my hope.
And if you happen to see David standing in front of a Lamborghini, that's not David Perry.
If something went terribly wrong, yes. That's well, if I'm standing in front of a Lamborghini, that's okay. Or if I'm driving, that's fine. But if I'm like showing it off,
yeah, there you go.
Wrong, yes.
Absolutely. Man, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And I just got to ask you one last thing, man. The next book that you got coming out, will it have anything to do with crypto?
Yeah, great question. I'm really fascinated by that space. And I would say that if I do write another book, by the time it comes out, it will have to deal with it. There won't be a choice.
I cannot wait to have that conversation. I'm new into it, but am fascinated as far as the direction that it's going. And I hope we can continue with a conversation like this in the future.
Yeah, be happy to.
Thanks so much, David. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Marsh.
Hey, that's all the time that we have today. Let me know how your progress is going. You can find me at marshbuice.com. That's spelled MARSH BUICE. It's spelled like juice with a B in front. And there you will find all the socials where I hang out and also the links to the YouTube channel. I'd love for you to subscribe to that channel as well. And while you're there, you can walk the aisles and comb through hundreds of previous episodes. And in the bottom right is a mic, and that's a link from you to me. I would love to hear from you. Tell me what's going on in your life and also how I can help. I'm no hair, but I'm all ears. Remember, the greatest sale that you will ever make is the sale you own you, because you're more than enough. Stay amazing. Stay in the sales life.